Okay, so everyone, thank you for coming back to another episode of RCCSS Chats. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your night to join us. Before we get started here, I do want to give a quick announcement about our upcoming RCCSS conference. It's called Actionable Analytics Using Sports Technology to Inform Your Practice, and it's scheduled for Sunday, April 3rd, 2022. I do miss the in-person conferences, but I have to say these virtual conferences have been a huge success, pulling in some world-renowned presenters. And this next one is going to be living up to those same expectations. So make sure to register and get your spot early.
So as usual, this is a live session and we are recording it, as I'm sure you saw the announcement there. So we'll be using that to post on YouTube and other social media platforms. If you have any questions throughout the chat, then just write them in the chat box and we'll try and get them in as they're relevant, or maybe at the end of the talk, depending kind of how we're rolling through. And if you haven't already turned your video on, it's always great to see everyone's faces. And yeah, so if you want to put your video on, that would be great.
Okay, today I'm really excited for today's interview. I've got to know Jenn Turner briefly as part of the conference committee, but it's going to be really good to get to know her a little bit better. Jenn is a fellow of the Royal College of Chiropractic Sports Sciences and lives in British Columbia. She graduated from Brock University and then from CMCC, and she's currently the lead therapist for BMX Canada. She works with these athletes in the daily training environment and travels with the athletes to BMX Next Gen, high performance camps, and World Cup competitions. Her career highlights include working at the 2012 Olympic Games in London, 2016 Olympic Games in Rio de Janeiro, and most recently in Tokyo 2021. Jenn also owns and runs 2 clinics in Vancouver and is involved with Own the Podium as part of the High Performance Advisory Committee. Her husband is also a chiropractor who works with the Vancouver Warriors of the National Lacrosse League. And last but not least, she has 2 kids that are 6 and 8 years old. Welcome to the show, Jenn.
Thank you.
Like I was saying there, I'm really happy to have you here today because you really deserve to be highlighted. Although I've got to work with you for a couple of years now, I had no idea that you've been to 3 different Olympics. So that's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to start off by talking. Yeah, I know it does date you a little bit.
Thanks.
Although you would never know by looking at you, Chris.
Yeah, honestly. No,
races, it makes me look like I'm 12.
We're going to start off by talking about some of your experience with Cycling Canada. So just tell us about how that first started and how that opportunity came about.
Well, my kind of experience getting in with Cycling Canada was kind of right place, right time as kind of a situation. I used to compete in triathlon, pretty high level. And one of the chiropractors that I had worked with in when I was competing as an athlete referred me a patient when I was working as a chiropractor. And so that patient happened to be, he was a high level cyclist, and he really liked my approach to treatment and how I involved him in the process and what I did and how I did it. And so he referred 2 of his teammates to me, and those 2 teammates happened to both be on the national team and had both happened to qualify for the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. So yeah, it was really cool to work with those guys, and I really liked how I worked, how I treated them, and how, again, I involved them in the process. And one of those athletes, he had qualified for Beijing and was doing a training camp in Australia, and then he crashed and really hurt his shoulder. So he came back to Vancouver, and I treated him a couple times at that point, up to that point, and then kind of worked with him a little bit more he ended up separating his shoulder. So we were working on it every day in the clinic because he had to go to Manchester to compete, to at least get on the start line at the next World Cup in order to maintain his qualification at the Olympics. So we were making really good progress in the clinic, and and then he was like, well, like, I have to go to Manchester, I have to start this, but I'm really liking how quickly I'm recovering. I need to be in good shape for the Olympics. Like, is there any way you could come with me to Manchester to this World Cup? So of course, like that's every, sport chiropractor's dream is to travel internationally. So I was like, oh, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be so cool. And he's like, there is a catch. Now, Cycling Canada is not going to pay for you to go. Like, so you have to pay your own way. So I mean, at that point, my number one was like, oh my God, this guy's going to the Olympics. We've got to keep doing this treatment because he is like progressing so much. And, the Olympics are in a month. And the second thought was like, of course I'm going to pay my way because I get my foot in the door, right? It shows that, that I've got that athlete, like it shows that compassion, I guess, for that athlete. It shows my willingness to be involved. It shows all of those that I want to be there. And so, yeah, I paid my flight to Manchester, and Cycling Canada did cover my my accommodation, my food. But so, yeah, so that's kind of one of the first messages, I guess, as a sports chiropractor, is that you are not in it for the money, because a lot of times you lose money when you do trips like that. So it was kind of an interesting go. And I kind of called Cycling Canada's bluff, I guess. They're like, oh, this girl's not going to pay to go to a World Cup. And so, yeah, that's kind of how I got my start. And sure enough, at that World Cup, I ended up treating, 4 other athletes that also qualified for the Olympics. So, and I had that opportunity to do a really good job with them, and really, like, first impression was huge there, and show my stuff and show what I could do. And I ended up traveling with those athletes for another 4 years. And also I got to kind of meet the national team coach at that time, who was coaching Great Britain, ended up moving over to Canada. And so, yeah, like, he was a really big advocate of mine as well. And so without that trip, I don't know whether those doors would have opened. So I definitely took advantage of that opportunity, and it worked in my favor. And I've been working with them ever since. So
that's amazing.
That's kind of how I got my start in there. Yeah, it's a good story.
Hopefully they've started paying for some of your travel by now.
Yeah, right. A little bit.
So you've been with Cycling Canada for quite a few years now. So how has that role evolved over the years?
Yeah, since then I've like pretty much only exclusively worked with Cycling Canada, aside from like working in my private practice. Initially, I started working with the track and road cycling teams. So the 2 athletes that I'd seen in my clinic both rode both road and track. So track is the velodrome. So yeah, I worked with them, those programs for the first few years. Yeah, and it was an intense few years working with the track. So at that time, the program was based at LA. So, and the coach was living here in Vancouver too. So it was really kind of easy for us to travel, because we didn't have a velodrome in Canada that was regulation size. They have a velodrome in Burnaby, but it's really cold. If anybody's ever been in there, it's really cold. The edges are really steep, and it's not long enough. So, and of course, in the wintertime, I mean, not complaining that I'm living in BC, but the athletes weren't able to kind of do their training outside. So the velodrome is actually a winter sport. Like, the season occurs during the winter months. So the program was centralized down to LA. And so it was a quick flight for myself and the coach to go down, and the girls and the rest of the team were living down there. And so, yeah, I was traveling back and forth maybe twice a month, spend 4 or 5 days down there, just kind of doing my thing, helping out, being involved, and then back to Vancouver. So it worked out really well. And yeah, so I worked with those guys for those few years leading up to the 2012 Olympics. So upon counting my hours for my residency, I realized that those hours leading up to 2012 were huge. I traveled over 120 days in that year leading up to the 2012 Olympics. So yeah, I was at the 2012 Olympics with the track cycling team, and the women's team pursuit actually did really well there, and they won a bronze medal. And so that was really cool to actually feel like I'd contributed to that performance and contributed to that victory, because I had worked so much with them over that time. Yeah, and then after 2012, I actually met the BMX team the team consisting of Adam, the head coach, and Tori, the athlete, at the Olympics in 2012. They just had me, because I was there already, so they had me just doing some little things for them, like helping with equipment and, you know, doing some little things. So I met them there. And then after 2012, the track cycling program kind of moved and centralized to Milton, Ontario, where they built that new velodrome there for the Pan Am Games in 2015. And so the program kind of moved over to Milton. And so they asked me if I wanted to go back to Milton. And I come from Ontario originally, so I wasn't really keen on relocating back there, especially having the clinics here in Vancouver and starting my life out here. So they asked me then after the 2012 Olympics if I wanted to do a few BMX trips. And so, yeah, like absolutely 100% I'm in. Like it was like, let me learn something new. Let me still be involved, but not have to move to Milton. And yeah, so then that's when I started working with BMX. And that was a big change, and not for the worse or better, but just holy smokes, what a culture shock moving from track cycling to BMX. So first thing, the injuries are so different. With track cycling, I'm dealing mostly with like tightness in the shoulders and the neck from being in that position for so long, and dealing with like hip issues and, you know, more overused kind of injuries. But with BMX, these injuries are catastrophic. Like we're crashing. Like my first day out, I think I saw Tori bounce off the jumps like 10 times. And yeah, so it was it was a lot different right away. And I definitely, like, you know, I recerted my first responders because I use that all the time. And yeah, and different types of rehab and different types of injuries for sure. And then also the culture is so different. So like road and track athletes tend to be a little bit more regimented, a little bit more like serious, and BMX was only in the Olympics since 2008, so it's fairly new to the realm of high performance sport at that time. And so it took I'm working with them after the very first Olympics in 2012, so it took a little while for that culture shift to happen. But yeah, even at one point, I remember Tori, who's our top Canadian BMXer at that time, he said, "Jen, the Olympics is not the be all and the end all." And I was like, yeah, you just wait to see how that sport changes and how the Olympics does become the be all and the end all of your sport, like much like some of the winter sports have with snowboarding and stuff. So yeah, so then I find myself working more and more with BMX. The program is centralized out here in Vancouver. And so it works really well for me to see the athletes in my clinic and to be involved in the daily training environment when needed. And I travel to all the World Cups, World Championships, and Olympics with them. In recent year, starting in January, I guess, the Cycling Canada is kind of changing its structure a little bit. So they're kind of, I don't even know how to explain it because everything is changing with how we're not supposed to call them disciplines anymore, with therapy. So we're kind of more sharing resources. So I did get the invite with Cycling Canada to go to Commonwealth Games, but with the track and the road side. So they're kind of reintegrating us back into reintegrating me back into that and trying to share therapists a little bit more between the sports. I did have to turn that role down though, because BMX World Championships were at the exact same time. I'm like, come on, give me a week difference. But I couldn't leave those guys. I've been working with them so much that, I felt like that was what I needed to do. So yeah, so I'm working currently with the new program, the new system. I'm one of the lead therapists in Cycling Canada now. And yeah, still learning every day about the athletes and different things. And yeah, so I think I answered your question.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting to see the shift over the years, both for you and as the program as a whole. With your title now as lead therapist for BMX Canada, I guess that's kind of even shifting back to just Cycling Canada. Like, what does that role look like? And has that team changed in that, like, are there more athletes as a part of BMX in Canada?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, like there's definitely a lot more athletes involved in BMX than there were to start. So when I first went to my first Olympics with BMX in 2012, we had one athlete. So it was Tori Nyhog. And then in 2016, 2016, it was still, no, so 2016 was my first with BMX, and it was just one athlete, it was Tori. And then in 2021, we had two athletes. So we qualified a male and a female. And so that was, yeah, again, progress in that realm. Yeah.
I'll pass along to the next one here. Is that role with BMX Canada and Cycling Canada a full-time role for you, or not? Are you working like in your own clinics as well?
No, I'm on a contract with Cycling Canada. So I just do, I do many of the trips. There are things included in that contract that like include my involvement in the daily training environment. And I do World Cup trips and major games. And if they have any camps or stuff, I definitely make myself available for that, trying to integrate this taking care of yourself model from a young age with these athletes. Because again, like BMX is still a super strong culture. And yeah, one of the previous athletes who's now an athletic therapist in one of my clinics, I remember he got laughed at for rolling. Like, what, dude, what are you doing? Rolling? Come on, like rolling and stretching. So I'm trying to introduce that culture, or the high performance culture, into these younger age groups.
Yeah.
So I do work just part-time, but again, with the program being centralized out here in BC, it's easier to see some of the athletes like within the clinic structure, so that I am integrated on a day-to-day. I also, the coach and I have kind of grown quite close because we are the only two that go on the trips together. Like, we're the BMX staff. It's just the two of us. So we spend a lot of time together, and we work really well together. So, I mean, I want to do everything I can to help him. And because if I don't do it, it's he's responsible for it. So I try a lot to help. Again, answering, kind of going back to your previous question about my role as therapist in BMX. So my role on these trips is interesting too. I'm not just a therapist. I do everything that the head coach doesn't do. So Adam and I work together. We've kind of come up with a system and a way that we work really well together. Like, I do a lot of video on the day of the racing. So we use video analysis in BMX to look at a technical skill for speed. So, should I have jumped that? Should I have manual that? Like, that's how they're getting through each technical session. But other competitor too, like, oh, did you see how the Australian guy went up and around you? That's where you kind of lost it. Or so they use the video on real time. So the video roll on the day of is an important job to do. And so I'm in the stands recording while Adam's kind of taking athletes up to the starting line, finish line. The other things that I do when I'm on the road is like groceries. So it's interesting to see a bunch of 17 to 23-year-olds in a grocery store. It's like, and again, making sure they're buying the right foods and just keeping an eye on them in general, because some of these athletes are quite young. So I am the mom of the team, I guess. The other interesting thing I get to do is I get to be a chauffeur. So our last trip was to Turkey. That was in October. And so I'm like, oh, I hope I don't have to drive there. No, there's two of us. Of course I'm driving there. I'm not just driving there. I'm driving a honking 20 passenger van with a bunch of athletes in the back that I'm responsible for in Turkey. So I don't know if anybody's ever driven in South America or Turkey, but it's quite an adventure. They have these roundabouts, and there's no rules. Like you go in there and I just like, essentially I could have closed my eyes and like hoped that I got through this roundabout with all these athletes in the back. So yeah, sometimes I have to remember that I'm a grown-up and I am responsible for all these people's kids and these athletes as well, like during all of these extra moments of the day as well, and making sure they're not like the young ones aren't going out partying and stuff like that. So my role, to go back to your previous question, now that my brain fart is over, I do a lot of things on the road, and I mean I think that's pretty similar to other therapists in that work with other organizations as well. Like your job doesn't stop at therapists. You do whatever is needed of you, especially if they're paying you to do that. So
that's awesome. I mean, just kind of on the topic of travel, Chris mentioned that you had been to 3 different Olympic Games, and I didn't know that you had done that either, which is amazing. How would you compare your experiences at each of these games in terms of like, you know, where was it? How, you know, the athletes, like you've touched on that a little bit, but yeah, it'd be great to hear about that.
Well, my first Olympics was with the track cycling team, and I was in London. And so that was an amazing experience. And it was amazing for like such the geekiest reasons. It was amazing because I was the most excited about being in the same realm as many of my mentor therapists. So it wasn't athletes at all. It wasn't like the travel. It was like, oh my gosh, like Dr. Bob McCormick is here. This is amazing. And at one point I ran into one of the treatment rooms after Bob had given me a tour of the polyclinic and the village and stuff. And I mean, Dr. McCormick is one of the top orthopedic surgeons in Canada. For anybody who doesn't know, he works with the Connects and the CFL and stuff. And he actually lives in my hometown, and we're friends now. We're kind of like, he just lives like across the ravine. And so, yeah, like I go to his place for dinner. But at that time, I was like, how can I get Bob to notice me? Like, it's like I was doting on him or whatever. But so yeah, he took me for a tour in the clinic, and I came back and I was like, oh my gosh, I just got to hang out with Bob McCormick and see the polyclinic. And I didn't realize that the 2 women's basketball coaches were standing over there, and they were kind of snickering at me like they thought I was the biggest geek ever. But so yeah, that was my experience of the first one, was just like taking that all in and being around all of these super cool, like like therapists that are the top in their field, and like just trying to soak every moment in. And then as I said earlier, the women's team pursuit team that I'd worked so intensively with over the past few years ended up winning a bronze medal. And that was pretty cool experience for my first Olympics as well. My second Olympics, so that was with BMX in Rio. And again, it was just me and Adam, the head coach, and then Tori was our only athlete. And at that time, that was Tori's second Olympics, and he was in his mid-20s. So he's fairly independent and fairly, you know, like knows what he needs to do to prepare. He's super chill. So he's, you know, he just does his thing, and we're there if anything goes wrong, essentially. And I mean, he was healthy, which is an unusual status for Tori. And so it was kind of like a vacation, that one, because we're just like, well, what do we do? Let's go hang out by the pool. So yeah, it was neat. It was in a beautiful place. And again, it was really neat to be there. And I mean, the fact that he's healthy and I didn't have a lot to do, of course, I felt guilty the whole time that I wasn't doing enough, but it was good that he was healthy, and he ended up finishing 5th at that Olympics, which was his best. He did our job, and we got him to the start line, and he did the rest. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. Adam and I actually hacked those Olympics. We got to see like diving and track cycling, and we're sitting on a bus with Rafael Nadal. So that was pretty cool too. So we always joke about the year we hacked the Olympics, and only in Brazil would you do that. You wouldn't get to do that in Europe or whatever. Like, it was only because it was in South America that we managed to sneak in. And then of course the last Olympics, most recent ones being in Tokyo during a pandemic. So it was a lot different but it wasn't a lot different. I was shocked at how it felt the same. It was the same energy. It was the same excitement. It was the same like crowds of people because we hadn't been around any people in a year and a half. So it was still amazing. And I think that that vibe was mostly because people, like the athletes, realized they almost weren't able to do it. Like it was, they were so grateful that it happened, that they had all of these COVID restrictions in place, like hand sanitizing, the dividers between the seats in the cafeteria, like you had to do your tests, the tests every day, weren't able to go into the city. And like, I guess the biggest bummer would have been that athletes' families couldn't come and watch. I mean that, but it felt, again, it felt the same for us, like for the BMX group. We were getting on the buses and then they'd seal the doors closed. So if the bus door had been opened between the village and the venue, they like your whole bus is like contaminated or whatever. So they had a lot of protocols in place, but I don't feel like it changed. I don't feel like anybody thought it was a really negative experience. And again, I'm sure there are athletes that things didn't go their way and things happened, but with us, with cycling, we didn't really experience anything too negative at all. Yeah, the venue for us, other than we were wearing masks 24/7, even outside, that was a bit of a bummer because it was so hot too. But I mean, you suck it up. It's not about me. It doesn't matter if I have to wear a mask. I just do it because you're that's what you have to do to be there and to to do what you need to do for your athletes. I also got to go last minute kind of to the men's road race and work at the men's road race at the Tokyo Olympics. So here I am, like on a bus, heading to halfway up Mount Fuji to hand out water bottles to like Mike Woods and like see all these awesome Tour de France riders. So I really had a good experience as well these Olympics. So my view is totally biased, but I feel like it was still an amazing experience. And the other thing is like, no, there was no breakout in the village. Like that could have gone so wrong, that like having all of those people in there in the village, and it didn't. They managed to curb it all. Like they caught things at the airport before, like caught it, all the positives at the airport before they got in. And it, again, those athletes, the experience probably sucked, but for us, we didn't have any of that happen. And so that was like, we were so lucky and so grateful that our athletes in all of our cycling disciplines were able to compete and do their best. And we did have a bit of a, oh yeah, I forgot about this. We had a bit of a negative. We were at a training camp. So we had, again, a female and a male athlete. And we were at a training camp in Houston with a couple of other athletes before. And my athlete was out warming up to do some sprints, one of my athletes, and she rolled her ankle. And so she comes back in the house a couple minutes later. And I was like, what did you forget? Like, how are you back already? And she's like crying. And then I see her ankle and it's super, super swollen, lateral ankle. So I was like, we'll fix it up. We'll get you back out there. No big deal. You'll be able to sprint a few minutes in a couple of hours. Like, no worries. So I'm treating it. She sprained her ankle a number of times before. So I figure it's probably just, she's just rolled it again. No big deal. I truly believe that in my mind. And yeah, treated her. She did go out and sprint later on. And I treated her quite a bit for that ankle. It gave us something to do because she was healthy otherwise. And yeah, we head to Tokyo and her ankle swells up quite a bit, which again, totally expected on an airplane. And, we managed to get the swelling down and swelled up. And then a few days later, I noticed her limping as we make her walk to the dining hall. And I'm like, maybe we should not be making her walk anywhere. She's limping, like her, she's wearing Birkenstocks, which are hurting her feet. So I'm like, maybe just wear your running shoes and walk. And it doesn't hurt her to ride her bike at all. So her shoes are pretty tight, pretty stiff. So she gets her foot in there, doesn't bother her at all. So I'm like, okay, no big deal. We just don't get you to walk anywhere. You just ride the bikes in the village and we're good to go. So I'm treating her one day in the clinic and I can feel the lump in her foot. I'm like, oh my gosh, I think her foot's broken. But I'm like, I can't tell anybody this. I can't tell anybody this. I couldn't tell any, I had to tell Adam eventually. I'm like, oh my God, I have a confession to make. And he's like, what? I'm like, I think Drew's foot is broken. And he's like, shut up. You can't say anything. Because again, it was a really challenging moment, because what is your legal obligation? And what is your ruining Drew's Olympics? Because she's like gonna now have that in her head mentally. So she competes, she makes it to the final. Best result she's ever had. It was such a crazy experience. We were so happy that she made it out of that semifinal and made it into the final. Foot or no foot, this is her best like thing ever. When we get home in Vancouver at the airport, she's limping around, and I'd arranged with our BMX doc to get her an x-ray. So I'm like, hey, congratulations, give you a hug. I'm like, by the way, you got an x-ray tomorrow at 10 a.m. Yep, she's got a 5th metatarsal fracture, spiral fracture, not even a simple one. It's like spiraled right up. I was like, oh my gosh. So the next day, she like texts me and she's like, I can't even believe how you saved my Olympics. She was like, I will always be grateful. And that was like one of my highlights in sport. Like, okay, the decisions were all right. If I can breathe again. And yeah, like it was just such a crazy thing to happen. And I honestly, genuinely did not believe her foot was broken until that moment. I thought that it was okay. So I just went on thinking that it wasn't broken. It was just a sprain. And it was, so that solved my legal obligations to for imaging until we were done.
Yeah, that's a tough decision. But it all worked out, so that's great.
It all worked out, yes.
I mean, I think you touched on this a little bit, but and you talked about your experience being a chiropractor on the integrated support team and kind of taking on a lot of the different roles that the coach isn't doing. But have you found that this has changed over the years?
Yeah, like chiropractic for sure. When I first started, no one had ever really heard of a chiropractor working with a sports team. So it did take a lot of education on my behalf, both for athletes and other staff. And yeah, it's like the profession has progressed. I feel like over the years, it's progressed also in Cycling Canada Association. We now have another, actually he's a sport fellow, Sean Duquette. He also works with Cycling Canada, and he's in the system and yeah, and communicates a lot. So it's so great that they've got another chiropractor on board as well. And they're like, you know, they've got physio and so they're definitely seeing kind of what we can offer and what we can do. Yeah, so it's definitely progressed. Actually, the aforementioned athlete with the separated shoulder that I traveled to Manchester with, he had an interview after that Manchester race, and they were like, oh my gosh, how are you here? How are you miraculously recovering from your injury? And he's like, oh yeah, my physiotherapist, Jenn Turner, is doing a great job. And I was like, oh, no. Like we've been working together for months. And so I had to educate him at that time. And yeah, he was kind of incredulous that he was like, no, you're not a chiropractor. No way. Chiropractors are crazy. And so it was just like kind of educating and yeah, and kind of forging those barriers. But I kind of like to do that in general. Like even in my practice, I like people like, I don't know why I'm here to see a chiropractor for my ankle. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I'll show you why. And then, so I do like convincing those people that we're not just tunnel vision type therapists. We do treat the whole body. So,
well, yeah. Thanks for starting to forge that road for us.
Are you that I'm old, Chris?
I just had to get another job in there. Over the past couple of years, I've been hearing a lot more about that high performance advisory committee. Can you explain to me and to the rest of listeners what that is?
So the high performance advisory committee is part of Own the Podium, and what they're doing is they're trying to get these different subgroups and these subgroups are kind of setting a baseline standard for all therapists coming into any national sporting organization. So On the Podium is in charge of all the NSOs, the national sporting organizations, all the national teams. And so what they're doing is they're trying to standardize every aspect of every position in the IST, I guess, that works with a national sporting organization. So there's a paramedical stream, which is us physio, athletic therapy, massage therapy. They have biomechanics, they have sport medicine, they have nutrition and strength and conditioning. And I probably have forgotten maybe research and innovation. But what they're doing is they're creating a certification, a high performance certification for each of these subgroups that you have to apply for. So you have to be qualified to apply for it. And so I've just done this process. Because I'm part of the High Performance Advisory Committee, and I'll explain a bit more of that in a minute, but I want to talk about this high performance certification. So they have, I've done because I'm part of the advisory committee, I'm one of the guinea pigs, I guess, for this high performance certification. So I've done the application, which took me a really, really, really long time, but it was so cool because I really got to reflect on all my experiences. So these high performance certifications are to highlight soft skills or to train soft skills. They're not trying to teach us anything technical. They figure that we're getting that from our professional association. So in order to even apply for the high performance certification, you have to be a sport fellow in any like sport physio, sport massage, or sport chiro. And then athletic therapy doesn't have a special sport delineation at this time yet. So you have to have that, and then you can apply for this high performance certification. So I'm just waiting now. I've done the application and I've had my interview, and now I'm just waiting to find the next steps. But the advisory committee, we are comprised of sport chiro, sport physio, sport massage, athletic therapy. We meet kind of once a month-ish, and we kind of get the information from On the Podium, and then it comes down, like trickles down to us. And then my role is to liaise on that information with RCCSS so that every sport chiro is in the know of what's going on here with all of these various initiatives that On the Podium is coming up with. So they also have Sport Scientists Canada. And so that's a website where kind of all this high performance stuff is housed. So if anybody's not a member and is interested in this type of stuff, you go to the Sport Sciences website and you register. And I know this kind of leads into another topic, but you sign yourself up for either high performance practitioner, I guess. And if you're working with an NSO, you do that one. And if you're not, you can sign up for the professional one. And then they'll send you kind of the updates and stuff like that too. So this is more for the high performance or the Sports Scientists Canada and the high performance certification stuff. And so, yeah, they're trying to, it's a directive from Sport Canada. So Sport Canada is heading this, and they're trying to develop a project to establish Canadian sport within the world. So as a leader, so they're following like Australia's lead and some other, I think Britain as well has, the Australian and the English Institute of Sport both have this sort of framework. So they're following along with that. So yeah.
Is the High Performance Advisory Committee new, or has it been around for a long time?
It's been around for a while, but it wasn't always called High Performance Advisory Committee. It was called NSMAC before. I don't even remember what that stood for, but it's existed in a previous type of form before it was the High Performance Advisory Committee. And yeah, I randomly got involved with that as like a right place, right time kind of thing as well. Yeah. So, and I will tell the story because it is relevant to how chiro is even in there. So they had the meetings at the SPIN conference. I don't know if anybody, SPIN is a conference that On the Podium puts on every year, and it's kind of in conjunction with the Canadian Sport Institutes across Canada. And so I was at the conference one year, and they have the discipline meetings before the conference starts. So they had a medical meeting, they have a data and innovation sciences meeting, they have a biomechanics meeting, they have a sport medicine meeting. So I go to the paramedical meeting, which is athletic therapy, registered massage therapy, and physiotherapy. And so I go in the door and I'm in there, and they're like, oh, you're a chiropractor? No, nope, this isn't your meeting. And so I go out and I'm like, well, what meeting do I go into then? And so I run into Bob McCormick in the hall. And he's like, oh, well, come into our meeting. We're the doctor's meeting. So you can come right in because you're a doctor as well, which is really, really nice to hear, right? So I go in there and they're like, no, you're not really a sports physician. So no, you don't belong here either. So there was really no place where I belonged. And so that moment, that's when Bob was like, well, geez, we need to have a place for like, so he walks me back into the paramedical room. He's like, yep, sports chiro is now part of your thing. And so from that moment on, it was, yeah, we've now been included in that group of paramedical. But I will say it's still a work in progress, because even for the high performance advisory or the high performance certification, when I went to like fill out the application, like they didn't really have the details correct on who could, like what made you applicable or like to write that exam. So I was like, well, who wrote this? Like, this is not what you need to do to be a chiropractor. Like who, so anyways, we're still working on those bits of educating them as to what chiros do, what kind of education we have, and that kind of thing. So it is still a work in progress, but it's there, we're in there. So we're getting the info just like everybody else. So that's what's important.
How do you feel like we're going to get more sports chiropractors into that program?
Oh, I think the Sports Sciences website, or the Sports Scientists Canada website, like getting people in there, they're going to definitely start inviting more sports chiros into doing that high performance advisor or the high performance certification. There are also a number of different subcommittees and stuff that I think we can like try to kind of work our way towards that stuff. So just getting on that site and engaging in that site and being involved, and like, you know, they'll put out on that site, they'll put out some of the different subcommittees are Red S and women in sports sciences, and occasionally they'll throw out an application for you to be a mentor in for the women in sports sciences, for example. And so I think those are the ways that like we can get into a little bit more of that. And as more national sport organizations or NSOs have chiro on their roster, I think that will help as well. One of the things that we've done in the last couple of years, 2 years, as part of the High Performance Advisory Committee, is we have taken an inventory, I guess, on all the therapists who work with all the national sporting organizations. So making sure that we're getting all those names on that list is also integral. So then they're getting in the system with Own the Podium and Sport Canada and some of those other organizations as well, and getting that information.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Next, we're going to move on to next question. So these are just kind of like rapid fire questions, get to know Jenn Turner a little bit better. So first off, where did you grow up?
Flesherton, Ontario. Very small town. Dairy farm.
Yeah, it is small. What sports do you participate in?
I used to do high performance triathlon. Now I just more run, try to keep up to my kids in mountain biking and skiing.
Nice. Where's your ultimate vacation?
Oh, anything doing something adventurous with my family.
And favorite meal?
Sushi and Starbucks. I'm such a Vancouver person now.
Yeah. Beer, wine, or liquor?
I don't drink a lot, but I do like the sour beer.
Nice. That's very Vancouverish too.
Oh, is it? Well, I don't even
Yeah.
know.
All the trendy independent beers. Who were your clinicians when you were at CMCC?
Dr. Padge and Dr. Brody. And I still have Cam in my phone as Dr. Brody.
Awesome.
And they're huge mentors. I would not be where I am without those two, and like Scott and Janice as well. They were all kind of that same group of clinicians when I was there. And those like, Cam is the one who talked me into, I almost called him Dr. Brody. Cam's the one that talked me into applying for the sport residency and to like following through and to coming to Vancouver. And yeah, so I really do owe them a lot.
Yeah, I love asking that question because everybody has a good story about that. Who else should we interview next on RCCSS Chats?
Courtney Brown. I think she's like, her job and like the stuff she's doing is super interesting, and I think she would have some really good things to say. So I think she'd be a great one.
For sure.
There's so many great people out there doing great chiros out there doing some great things. Like, it'd be cool to hear like Alex Lee talking about some of his research stuff as well. And I don't know how to pronounce his name, but the fencing doctor guy, the research.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nader Abdelkader.
Yeah. He'd have a good story too, I'm sure.
Yeah. And lastly, what's next for Jenn Turner?
Like tomorrow next, or like the next hour? Because I don't even know.
That's a mom answer.
I am surprisingly not much of a planner. I've been pretty lucky that my life has worked out the way it has. I never intended to open a clinic or two. I never thought that I would be traveling the world working with Cycling Canada. So, and sometimes my husband like, how do you, like, you're just chaos. Like, sometimes it's organized chaos, but most of the time it's just chaos. It's like, seriously, I don't know how you get through life. So I'm doing okay considering people think that. So what's next? I don't really know. Keep on keeping on.
Yep. We're just going to go to the audience to see if we have any questions there. So you can type them in, and Mel, you can moderate this.
Yeah, so we have a question from Felix, and he says that he's a hopeful new resident in the program. He's interviewing on Saturday, so good luck. And he's also living in Vancouver. And so he's wondering what kind of advice you'd have for him, who doesn't have any direct mentors or clinicians mentors and clinicians here, like the in-person CMCC students have in Toronto.
Yeah, that's really tricky. When I was a resident, I was really lucky to have a really awesome group of guys, because I don't think we had any girls. Hey, Clark? It was a really great group of guys that was how I feel like I learned the most, was from those guys. So that was like Todd Marshall, Clark, Sean Graham, Bill, Jacobs. So that's kind of who I did my stuff with. So maybe try to find and we did a lot of stuff together. So maybe my advice would be try to find the other residents and like do stuff together and work on your research, do some hours together, because it would be really hard to do it alone. Like, again, I'm really lucky that I had those guys to kind of help get through some of that stuff. And I mean, all those guys, Glenn Cashman too is one of them in my group, and everybody's doing amazing things now from that group. So yeah, I hope that's helpful advice, but I would try to connect with the other residents and get through it together. And also, sorry, another piece of advice is I said get through it together, but the experience of the residency, it shouldn't be something that you're just trying to get through. You should be trying to make the most out of it that you can, because that's where all of my opportunities have come from, is that residency program. If I wasn't doing that program, I wouldn't be able to do the things that I'm doing now. Like, I wouldn't have the friends that I have now. I wouldn't have done all those hours with Cycling Canada or had those experiences. So I wouldn't have learned what I've learned that's taken me on the path to who I am today. So I feel like I think about this a lot. I'm super grateful that residency journey was a little bit longer for me than it should have been, but it was a long journey, because that's where I learned so much. And so, yeah, so embrace that too. Don't try to get through it. Try to take as much from that process as you can, because it's one of your last opportunities to learn so much.
It's funny that you say that because like Chris, Mitch, and I, who we went through the residency together, we're always like texting each other being like, oh my God, those are the good days. Like you don't even realize it when you're in it, right? And you just look back and you're like, oh, it was hard and it was like long hours and long days, but when you're done, you miss it too.
Totally. And like, again, like seeing Clark's face here makes me so happy because I haven't seen him in so long. So it's really nice to have him hearing my story and where I've been since we've like, you know, we're hanging out together trying to get through it.
Yeah. Okay, we have another question from Christina. She says, great talk and thank you. How did you balance pregnancy and maternity leave and now being a mom while traveling and working with teams and owning clinics? That's a great question.
It is a great question. Did I tell you that I'm not much of a planner? I always seat in my pants. Having a good support system definitely is helpful. My husband is a rock star. He does so much when I'm away. My kids are 6 and 8 right now, so they're still quite young and still quite needing parents around. So yeah, I like maternity leave. I didn't really take a maternity leave. I was at BMX races until pretty much, Pan Am Games in 2015. I barely made the flight home before the cutoff of they don't let you fly when you're pregnant. So one of my best moments in chiropractic is when Tori won the gold medal at the Pan Am Games in Toronto. And there's a TV screen of me jumping up and down and my belly is huge. And it's like just bouncing along. So we always laugh at that. But yeah, so and then I didn't really take a mat leave. Owning my own clinic as well was helpful because I could kind of do what I wanted. So instead of taking a mat leave, I just cut my hours. Instead of working 6 days a week, I worked 5 or whatever. Like I would go in when I could. So that was a huge advantage as well. But yeah, and then I have, again, now that my kids are old enough and in sports, I have a great village of mom friends around that really help to shuttle my kids everywhere too. And yeah, so it's a tough slog, but I don't know, you just do it. And
just kind of going off of that, like what's your schedule like then on a weekly basis?
Well, I work in clinic 3 days a week. And I do long days. So like on Monday, I'll usually do like 10 a.m. till 8 p.m. ish. Because then I can justify taking those other days. On Tuesday or Thursday, usually I'll be working with BMX, either at the track or sometimes at my house if it's needed. And then I use those as my admin days. And then I work in the clinic Wednesday and Fridays as well. But again, kind of longer hours. And yeah, I shuttle my kids to every sport possible that they do. And yeah, I get up really early in the morning. I'm up at 5 every morning doing like admin work or charts or preparing answers for interviews. So just kidding, this is my only interview. But yeah, awesome. Hopefully I answered your question. I don't know, you can feel free to contact me and I can help some other way. Maybe like I can give you more tips or whatever.
That's great, thank you. Katie is asking, when did you open your clinics and what inspired your decision to do your own?
Again, right place, right time kind of story. The clinic I was working at in Vancouver closed down within 5 months of me starting there. And it was an amazing clinic. They had sport med, they had physio, they had chiro, they had naturopath, they had Pilates. So that vision was what I wanted to do. That clinic closed down. And so a few, like a massage therapist, physio, one of the sport med docs, and like there was conversations about opening our own, and I'm like, I'm so in. So it kind of just happened to fall into my lap. So, but I used that opportunity to build something great out of a negative, and it worked out. And that was the inspiring. I never meant to open a clinic in Vancouver because my husband is also from Ontario, and I promised them that when I was finished the residency in 2 years, we would move back. And that was 17 years ago. So yes, so
Whoops.
We're not going back.
I think the probably last question here is from Mel Lopes, I believe, asking how much notice does Cycling Canada give you when blocking out time from your clinic? There's multi-parts here, so I'll try to ask them all at once. Does Cycling Canada cover your expenses to treat their athletes? And how do you balance your clinic life when working with Cycling Canada? Do you have a locum that covers for you?
I'll answer the last one first. No, I don't have a locum, but my clinics, we have chiro, physio, massage, acupuncture, naturopath, and yes. And so I will encourage my patients to see either chiros or a therapist when I'm away. So it works out really well if people are really needing that continuity. They'll see another therapist. And just Cycling Canada, I'm on a contract, so they kind of cover like a broad number of things. It's not a lot, but again, I don't do this. I don't do it for the money. I do it to do it, right? Because I love to do it, and I love the relationships with these athletes and the coaches, and yeah, to be involved and just to be busy. And what was the third question in there?
Third one was just about balance of clinic life and Cycling Canada.
Yeah, so I do see a lot of I do see athletes in my clinic, but I do try to like do that on a separate day so that I can see as many patients as I can in the clinic, and then see the athletes, because they typically need a bit more time at times as well. So having they'll come into the clinic if I have a spot or whatever, but I try to do it separately so that I can spend the time that I need to with them.
Awesome. All right, well, Jenn, thanks so much for the interview tonight. How can people reach out to you if they do have questions for you to follow up afterwards?
Probably my email, which is Jenn, JENN at Moveo, MOVEO.ca is probably the best. Or right. like the BMX kids, I do have Instagram that I check once in a while when they teach me how to use it.
No TikTok yet though, eh?
Oh, no.
All right. Thanks once again, Jenn, and thank you to everyone else who joined in for the live session here. If you would like to rewatch this episode, or if you've missed previous episodes, you can find them on YouTube by searching RCCSS chats. Thank you, everyone, and I'll hopefully see you again soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks so much, Jenn. That was awesome.